So I had the great pleasure today of listening to the Glitch Bottle podcast. I'd never heard it before, and first of all, let me say that I think the host did a wonderful job interviewing. This was Glitch Bottle number 31, and the guest was a gentleman named John R. King IV. Now, if you're unfamiliar with his work, he's been around for quite some time, and I've been following it because a friend of mine was obsessed with it a ways back, so I've looked at his blog post on LiveJournal quite a bit. And I've actually purchased a couple of his books, too. And I've always found him to be a very interesting character. And what I find most interesting about him is that he is really one of the leading forces in the sort of grimoire purist movement that's been going on for quite some time. However, listening to him on the podcast today, I got a very different impression of him. And I just want to share with you a couple of things that I noticed. In a lot of ways, he seems to be closer to my perspective on magic than anything else. He operates from a spirit model, which I operate from too, believe it or not. I just operate from one in which I have a Gnostic outlook, in which we're all part of the same great consciousness, and I think ultimately he was putting himself in that position as well. He wanted to separate himself from purely psychological magicians, but I think those are actually fairly few and far between. If you're just interested in psychology, you can just go see a therapist. You don't need to gather up a bunch of tools and do a bunch of strange rituals. Most people who practice magic, in one way or another, definitely believe that it's doing something outside of their own psyche, or most of them wouldn't do that. I don't want to speak for everybody, but that seems to be my position. And this positioning of the spirit model versus the psychological model, I think it's actually a straw man argument that a lot of people use so that they're not directly attacking another person's perspective that actually exists, because there's just no one who actually does this psychological model thing. So it's a convenient, just throw rocks at the psychological model, because there's literally no one to defend themselves, because no one takes that position. Now, other people have more nuanced ideas about what spirits are and how the spiritual world may work in their experience than just simply that there's me here, spirit there. There's a more complex and interesting way of approaching these things, but the essence of it is that there's when you reach out into consciousness, you connect with a spirit that is not yourself, and you communicate with that spirit, and you ask that spirit to do things, and that spirit either does or does not do them. Now, what was interesting about John R. King's perspective is that, as far as I had understood, he was a person who was very much along the line of, you have to get everything exactly the way that it needs to be, that is written out in the grimoires, or nothing's going to work. I seem to remember reading him saying that you need to have the lion skin belt, or the whole thing isn't going to work. And Goetia, that's in the Goetic grimoire that says that you should wear a lion skin belt that has the various names of God around it and so forth. And that a lot of people have really they hunt down people in Africa in order to find a lion skin belt in order to make that happen. And he basically said in the podcast that I listened to today, a person could have that, and they're still not going to get any better result than a person who doesn't. He literally said those words, and I was like, whoa, this guy is very different than I had thought. Now, he doesn't say you shouldn't get a lion skin belt, or you shouldn't bother. And in fact, if you can get a lion skin belt, that's probably all for the best. But he does say, just do your magic the best that you can. He also suggests that people should actually start practicing their craft rather than studying things endlessly over a time period. Instead, start doing things, start actually taking action. And that's actually been one of my big things. One of the reasons that I make lots of little objects for people is because I want to help them to actually get started in really doing things. And yeah, maybe the way that I make them isn't the perfect grimoire purist model of how to make them, but I get objects into people's hands so they can start working with this stuff and start really getting their feet wet, because ultimately it's about consciousness more than anything. It's about moving your consciousness into the place where you can make contact with these things, and the more that you do it, the more that you can get into that space. So the more that you kind of put things in front of you doing it, then the more difficult it is for you to ever get around to getting the ability to actually make that kind of contact. Another thing that he said that was really interesting was that if your seals are slightly wrong, in other words, if you draw your magical talismans or whatever incorrectly, that's not going to negatively impact anything as long as your intention is in the right place. In fact, the things that he thought were the most important seem to be faith in God, which he means in a very literal and traditionalist sense to a large extent, although he seems to feel like you can approach that in a somewhat linguistic manner as well, and then to have a clear intention. Clear intent and faith in God are the essential components, according to him, and everything else is just kind of stuff that you bring to the table in order to try and improve things. Now, he does emphasize that you need to put as much as you can into things, and that if you come at it with too crappy of material or too crappy of intention, you're not going to really get anywhere. So here's the thing: I'm not going to ruin the whole interview, but those are just things I want you to listen for when you listen to it. It's a pretty long interview, but it was very interesting, and I highly recommend it, and I recommend this guy's podcast now. It's the first time I've ever listened to it. It was very good. So anyway, talk to you next time.